Tonight, as Boris Johnson is officially branded a liar by a committee of MPs set up when he was Prime Minister, he calls it the deranged conclusion of a kangaroo court. Well, our audience here certainly wants to discuss that, but also for many, the rather more pressing matter of rising bills and food prices. And today we're in a rather special location, the distribution depot of Iceland, the food retailer, which has over 1,000 stores in the UK. We're in Deeside, the name for the group of towns on either side of the Welsh-English border. Welcome to Question Time. On the panel from the government, David T.C. Davies, the Secretary of State for Wales. Before that, he was a junior minister under Boris Johnson, and after his resignation as an MP last week, David T.C. Davies said Boris Johnson got it right on Ukraine, on vaccines and Brexit, and I'm sorry he's gone. From Labour, Lord David Blunkett. He was an important part of the new Labour project under Tony Blair, serving as Education and Employment and then most prominently Home Secretary in the early 2000s. Now he's in the House of Lords and is Professor of Politics in Practice in his home city at Sheffield University. Charlotte Ivers is the political correspondent for Times Radio. She also contributes to The New Statesman and writes about other things, mostly cultural, for the Sunday Times. Guto Harri is a communications specialist, writer and broadcaster. His most recent TV stint was as a presenter on GB News. He's also a man who knows Boris Johnson very well. He was at university with him, worked with him when he was London Mayor and was his head of communications for most of his last year as Prime Minister. And the third and final David on tonight's panel, David Linden, is one of the SNP's 45 MPs in the House of Commons. He was elected in 2017 to the seat of Glasgow East, aged just 27. He speaks for the SNP on social justice. Good evening. Welcome to our panel. Welcome to our audience here in Deeside, in this great big warehouse. Great to see you, and of course, welcome to you at home as well. Thank you for watching. We're on social media as always, and we're also on a podcast on BBC Sounds after the programme. Remember, hit subscribe if you want to continue listening. So, it's been quite a day. Shall we get our first question? Emma Patwell.
Given the outcome of the Partygate inquiry, does the panel think that Boris Johnson's political career is finally dead and buried?
David T.C. Davies.
I think it probably is. I'm not saying whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I don't really see any way back for Boris. I mean, he's just left Parliament. He's resigned. He chose to do that, and that's fine. Any MP who's had enough can resign when they want to. Had he stayed, he would have been suspended for 90 days, so faced, well, possibly, that depends on how, but almost certainly would have faced a by-election. And therefore, I think that is the case. And I hope he's going to be remembered for the things I mentioned. I believe he was absolutely right on the Ukraine. He was right on getting the vaccine rollout sorted out, and he was right on Brexit. Somebody had to deliver Brexit because people had voted for it. And if I were Boris Johnson, I would want to be remembered for those things and not for the sort of unseemly rowing that's going on at the moment. We move on. We have Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who's doing, in my opinion, an absolutely fantastic job delivering on the 5 pledges he made around inflation and growth and stopping small boats and cutting waiting lists in England where we can do it. And I want Rishi to be able to get on with the job and to be the Prime Minister after the next election.
So will you be voting for the committee report and with the suspension on Monday?
I haven't read the report yet, which came out this morning. I've been travelling around North Wales all day.
But I can tell you,
I haven't read the full 90 pages, and as a former Select Committee chair for 10 years, I do tend to do that before I make decisions. But what I can say is I have every confidence that the committee were doing the right thing. I have confidence in the committee and the people who are on that committee of all parties. So I can say no more than that. And the report, which I haven't read yet, I've read all the headlines about it, is clearly concerning. So I want to make it very clear that I respect the work that the committee have done.
And so when Boris Johnson calls it the deranged conclusion of a kangaroo court? Yeah,
that's certainly not something I would support at all, no. The committee members, long-standing members of Parliament, very experienced. They went into this in a great deal of detail, and you know, whatever people may think about Boris Johnson, I've already said I've got a lot of time for him on those big issues. And he saved this country, by the way, from Jeremy Corbyn. But the work of that report of that committee needs to be respected.
Lord Blunkett, actually, I'm going to call you David B, because that's what you've requested. We've got 3 Davids on the panel, so you're going to be TC, you're going to be David, and you're going to be David B.
Well, I'm very pleased that this David is so enthusiastic about the current Prime Minister, because you'll remember you voted for Liz Truss, so...
You campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn, David.
I won't banter with you, but I think you'll find that I spent 3 years from the day after Jeremy was elected saying this was going the wrong way, and wrote and spoke about it. Anyway, that's by the by. What we're dealing with is this character, this phenomena, Boris Johnson, that has sucked the life out of the rest of the political arena and all the real issues that we need to deal with. And I've been reflecting over the last 7 days, and we've had the demise of Berlusconi. We've had Boris take himself out of Parliament, then blame everybody else that he's gone. And we've had Trump in court in the United States. I think we've had the dead, the departed and the demented. And I think the sooner we actually come to terms with the fact that Boris had his go, he had his term, he had the opportunity during COVID, when he came out of hospital, to reinvent himself, to be a serious Prime Minister, and he didn't. And it's not the parties, it's what happened at the dispatch box. This isn't about whether people had parties and slurring other people about whether they had them during lockdown. This is a tradition as part of our constitution, that if, as a minister and as Prime Minister, you lie at the dispatch box, you have to go. And that applied to Profumo 60 years ago with the scandal over Christine Keeler and the Russian envoy who was having an affair with her at the time, and it applies to Boris Johnson. He set up, by the way, he set up the inquiry into himself. He actually was responsible as Prime Minister and with the Conservative Party for nominating the committee, including the 4 that made up the majority for the Conservatives. He was quite happy with Harriet Harman until things started to be unravelled. And he was quite happy, finish on this, because you'll nudge me otherwise, he's quite happy to take £245,000 of public money to pay for, arguably, the most effective legal team in the country to defend him. And then he has the cheek to blame the committee, the Parliament, even his Conservative colleagues. He's only got one person to blame, it's Boris Johnson.
Lots of hands up. Let's hear from some of you. Yes, the woman in the pink dress in the front here.
I'm actually quite concerned by your response saying you think it should. It's not a think you should. He lied. As David Blunkett said, the fact that he lied means he should never be an MP again. Is there no integrity left in politics? Is it OK to lie then?
Well, I can't stop somebody from standing for Parliament, and I can't stop them from being elected. What I've said to you is I think his time in office is over. I wouldn't support Boris Johnson.
You said you think it is. You said you think it should be. It's
well,
not
yes,
I think it should be. It's not a set rule for them and a set rule for us.
There is no set rule, but there is nothing to stop anybody, including yourself or anyone in this room, from standing for Parliament and winning an election. I have no say over that.
I guess what I'm looking for is more of a concrete, no, we don't expect him to be.
Do you think he should stand as a Conservative MP ever again?
Do you know, it's not actually up to me to decide who can.
It's not up to you to decide, but what do you think?
Let me be clear with you. I support Rishi Sunak, and I would not support anyone standing against him. And I've been very clear with you tonight that I think people should look at that report and understand that the people who wrote it are well-respected MPs. And actually, as David Blunkett just said, that report was that committee was set up by Boris Johnson, and we should respect their findings.
Mannion.
I'm not a fan of Boris. Think he told too many lies, you know, pathological liar. But I think Boris could make a comeback. And it's not because he's particularly special, but it's rather because of the inability of the establishment politicians to tap into what people want. Boris, you know, had his faults, but at least he spoke in plain English. He had a bold and clear vision, unlike his predecessor, unlike his successor, Rishi Sunak, who's just a conveyor belt politician. No real plan, just, you know,
honestly, I think that's very unfair.
The woman at the very back. And the woman at the very back, yes.
Now that it's established that Boris Johnson has lied, what else has he lied about? Has he lied about Brexit?
Has he sold us a big lie?
Guto.
He was never going to go quietly. One of his favourite films is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, so what's happened today was always going to happen. He'd rather go out in a, flurry of bullets.
A bullet, yeah.
And,
well, he says he did not lie. The committee has found that he did lie. What's your view?
I think,
you know the man
without personally attacking the committee, I think anyone is entitled to question whether there's right due process when your political opponent, a former acting leader of the Labour Party, presides over a process that can actually deprive you of your employment for 3 months and indeed for the rest of your life. Now, if Keir Starmer, his beer and curry night with friends during lockdown, was handed over to Dominic Raab or William Hague to decide whether that was a breach, I would have a problem with that. I would not think that was a fair process.
But there are a majority of Conservative MPs
It doesn't matter. This is not about the,
and the committee
this is not a numbers
has an
game.
opposition. The committee always has an opposition chair. You know that.
This is a quasi-judicial process that should not be at the whim of the numbers in the House of Commons.
So do you disagree with the committee then? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think
you're criticising
that if you can
do you disagree with it?
people of their livelihood, you need to be beyond reproach. And the idea that the former leader of the Labour Party can decide, essentially, on the process and the outcome that drives out a Conservative Prime Minister from Parliament, for me, whether you like Boris or not, does not look like due process. And one of the things we throw overboard far too easily in the UK is the idea of innocent until proven guilty. The idea that you are represented by a lawyer when your livelihood is at stake. The idea that you have proper due process and the person who decides is above reproach. I don't think we met that standard on this occasion, whatever you think of the outcome.
He had David Panic, who's, by anybody's standards, one of the most outstanding barristers in the country, at our expense. And if he hadn't resigned last Friday night, he could have gone into Parliament on Monday and defended himself against the accusations that have been made against him. Why don't you think he did?
Nobody wants to interview for their own job, particularly under the horrendous situation that he would be in.
Well, Guto,
and be dragged kicking and screaming to a by-election and all that. So
Guto,
what he's done is taking control.
Let's be clear. Are you saying then that you do not agree with the conclusions of the Select Committee?
I understand why Boris feels sort of slightly cheated by the process, but more importantly...
But that's not answering the question, Guto, that's not answering the question. Are you saying the Privileges Committee is wrong? I understand why there are questions about the process. What I'm more concerned about... OK, you're still not answering that question.
Millions of people who voted for Boris and who voted Conservative at the last election, having perhaps never been engaged with politics, certainly never dreamt in places like the North Wales corridor of voting Conservative, voted for a man that spoke to them in a way they'd never been spoken before, and the system has taken him out. And I think some people will be shocked by what has happened.
When you say the system, it was Conservative MPs.
He's not an MP.
It was the Conservative MPs that deserted him, and that's in the end why he stopped being Prime Minister.
That's the whole thing. I think a lot of people will be shocked.
Well, let's hear from some of these people, shall we? Yes, the woman there with the rather fantastic pink hair.
Thank you. I think the main problem we have here is that for the vast majority of people, this is not important. I understand in the Westminster bubble why it's so important. Because he was your colleague, your friend. It might happen to you because, let's face it, no offence, all politicians lie. It's part of the job. But for the rest of us, there are so many important things that are happening. You know, women are in danger. Children are in danger. And everything, the oxygen is being sucked out of all the things that actually matter.
Well, it's a very well-made point. We are going to come to other subjects. I have to say, you asked more about this than anything else, which is why we started with it, but I absolutely hear what you have to say.
And this lady is right, but not on one point, which is standards in public life really, really do matter. They do, honestly.
Yes, the young man there in the black T-shirt, yeah. No, further back in the black T-shirt. Yes, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so you say he should be innocent until proven guilty. He has been proven guilty. Everybody knows he's guilty. And to argue that he could still possibly be innocent of this lie that everyone knows he's told, it just feels like denying, like, the obvious truth.
Right. Well, let's hear from a bit more on our panel then. Charlotte.
I thought I might talk a bit about why I think this matters, because I usually agree with you. I think, you know, Westminster-based stories, process-driven stories can be really distracting, and I think as a political journalist, we do, as a profession, tend to focus on them too much. But I had the report here in full. I wish you'd told me you hadn't read it. I could have given it to you in the green room earlier. But this bit was the bit that really stuck out to me. This attack on a committee carrying out its remit from the democratically elected House itself amounts to an attack on our democratic institutions. And I think that's kind of important, because we all need the systems in Whitehall, in Westminster, by which our politicians are held to account to work. And in a way, this has proved the system is working, because we've got the report, we've got an outcome of it, and we've got all of this for all of us to see. So we all know what is the case now. But to have someone repeatedly traducing and attacking all of those institutions, I think is something we should care about, because it undermines people's confidence in the checks and balances that are there to keep us all safe.
And were you surprised by quite how damning the report was?
I was, to be honest. I mean, that sentence is quite remarkable. That's a former Prime Minister of our country. I think, was he the Prime Minister this time last year? Pretty much. And then you've got him being accused of basically attacking our democratic institutions. It says it in black and white here. That is remarkable. I've never seen anything like that. I know I'm slightly younger than the rest of the panel, but I doubt anyone on this panel has seen anything like that, really.
Well, and the committee has talked about it being unprecedented, certainly. Let's hear a bit more, because there's so many hands up. Yes, the man there with the sunglasses tucked in your shirt there.
Sorry, David, you've just said that you support Rishi.
Hang on, there's 3 Davids here.
Well,
David, you're
that's
right.
probably me, yes.
TC, we're calling it now, just for ease of comprehension.
It's not me.
You've just said you support Rishi, and Rishi wants to bring integrity back to the heart of government. So surely you and Rishi and everybody else got no choice, love or loathe Boris, but to vote to support the report on Monday?
Well, I've already said to you that I support the work the committee's done. I can't be more clear than that. There's a 90-page report there, and I've been visiting various businesses and things in North Wales today, but I'll go through it over the weekend, and I can assure you I take the report very seriously and the work that's been done very seriously, and I don't attack the committee at all.
The woman here in the front.
Isn't Rishi compliant in this? He held office at the same time as Boris Johnson. Surely he was involved in some way.
Well, he was also issued with a fixed penalty notice, you remember. So I'll get around there, and I'm going to come back to you, otherwise no one else will get a word in.
So, you know, he certainly wasn't involved in it.
But he was served with a fixed penalty notice.
Because he turned up 10 minutes early for a meeting in a place that he was meant
but
to
that
be
was the decision of the
meeting.
police.
Yes.
I mean, I thought it was quite interesting what Guto said about depriving Boris Johnson of his livelihood. I mean, let's not forget, this is a guy who has voted 3 times in the House of Commons since he left office and earned £5 million. I think Boris Johnson probably isn't going to go hungry as a result of leaving Parliament. Now, the reality is that the Conservative Party entered into an agreement with Boris Johnson. They knew fine well the guy was a gambler, the guy was somebody who took risks. He was always a bit creative with the truth. And the reality is that the chickens have come home to roost, and we've now got this unkempt man-child who has finally been chucked out of Parliament, and I don't think deserves to return. But I would go further than that. I think that the £245,000 of your money that was spent on legal costs should be recouped from Boris Johnson. I think that the honours list... Bear in mind, this is an honours list. He wanted to give his father a knighthood. I think his honours list should be scrapped. And I think that the £115,000 a year that he's due to get for the rest of his life as a former Prime Minister should also be waived as well. And we should all move on from this sorry saga and focus on the things that matter. The cost of living crisis, the NHS, and everything that matters to people in this room.
I mean, David Linden, since we've got you here, this is obviously a fairly torrid time for the government. It's not the easiest time for the SNP recently. You're talking about chickens coming home to roost. Obviously, Nicola Sturgeon was arrested and questioned by police, released without charge. But you've now had the 3 most senior people at the top of the SNP arrested and questioned by police.
So we've had this process has been ongoing for 2 years now. There's been 3 arrests and no charges, and I think it's absolutely right that we are transparent and that we go through with that process.
Well, you can't hide it. I mean,
we certainly can't.
There was a big tent in the front garden.
There's also the 1981 Contempt of Court Act, which I'm sure you wouldn't want me to breach on your programme, because unlike Boris Johnson, I respect the rule of law, and I'm not going to go and breach contempt of court.
I'm not asking you to. I'm simply saying you're talking about chickens coming home to roost. This is not the easiest time for the SNP either.
And the SNP's getting on with the day job. That's why Humza Yousaf, as First Minister, has tripled that fuel insecurity fund. The biggest issue that faces folk at the moment is the cost of living crisis, and we're getting on with that job.
I think they decided to send her flowers, didn't they? That was...
Who decided, sorry?
SNP leadership.
Hamza Yousaf sent flowers to Nicola Sturgeon.
I think most people are right to send flowers to their colleagues that are Republican.
Do they have something inside the flowers? Is it like an Egyptian?
I mean, if we're going to send things,
like an asp.
if we're going to send things to people, let's send, you know, a request to Tony Blair to appear before the International War Crimes Tribunal for invading Iraq. The government you served in.
Right, I'm going to get a few more points before I move on. Yes, there's a one right in the middle in a green and black shirt there. Yes.
I just want to ask the gentleman on the end, sorry.
Guto, who used to work for the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister.
2 questions. How does Boris feel cheated? How does he feel cheated? He knows the process and now he feels cheated. It's time he takes responsibility for himself. And like the gentleman said, we move on and stop wasting money on this man.
So the police, who are skilled, qualified, experienced, know the law, know the process, investigated the allegations at the heart of this. They concluded that Boris Johnson was in technical breach of lockdown regulations on one occasion in the cabinet room where the cabinet meets at 2 o'clock in the afternoon ahead of a meeting that a teetotal chancellor was also at. And they gave him a 50 quid fine. That's what the police decided was the scale of the crime, the nature of the transgression on this occasion. He paid that 50 quid fine. From that, we went to an inquiry that attributed to him and his leadership the bad behaviour of a whole load of grown-up, clever adults with moral agency, with the ability to decide for themselves whether to drink, whether to do whatever else was in Sue Gray's report. None of them have been mentioned. None of them have been hounded out of office. Boris Johnson has been pinned for the transgressions of all those people. And though he's not teetotal like Rishi Sunak, I bet it'll surprise most of you that he barely drinks. You'd be surprised about a lot of things about him. But his own party, because of the hysteria that would simply not go away about Partygate, and people would not allow him to talk about all the other things that mattered so much more last year, not least his courageous and principled leadership on the Ukraine, they drowned all of that out in a hysterical, myopic obsession with Partygate.
OK, hang on. Okay, so Boris Johnson got one fixed penalty notice. Downing Street itself, as you say, all these other smart people, they were fined. This is the most fined household in the entire country. Congratulations to them for the gold medal. And Boris Johnson is pictured with some of those people who have drinks in their hands. He told the House of Commons that he believed that all guidance was followed at all times. There are photos of him in which that is not the case. This is not about whether he had a party. This is about whether he misled the House of Commons. Correct. And it's there.
Guto, let me finally ask, as we're going to move on, because as you rightly pointed out, there are things that are affecting people's daily lives quite a lot more than this. And there are other questions I want to come to. Finally, do you agree with the Select Committee that Boris Johnson lied to the House?
I don't see how you can get into someone's head. I don't, in principle.
So you don't agree with them?
The accusation was misled. Answer yes. He corrected the record as minister.
Well, misled deliberately, which is another way of saying lie.
I don't know how they can say that he deliberately. I don't know how you could attribute motive to people and get inside their heads and decide that. Okay. It didn't matter to the police. Why should it matter to the former leader of the Labour Party who presided over this process?
Shall we move on?
Yes, please.
To another subject. Before we do, I'm just going to tell you about next week's programme. So next week is talking about divisive subjects, next week is the 7th anniversary of the Brexit vote. And you may or may not have heard that we are devoting the show to a conversation about how Britain now looks outside the EU 7 years on. So our audience, unusually, is going to be a cross-section of people who took that decision back in 2016. That is Leave voters. Some will have changed their minds, some not, some may be uncertain, and that's what we're going to explore. We'll be in Clacton-on-Sea on the Essex coast. We'll have the regular question time panel. Government, we're in England, so it'll be government. Labour will have a prominent Leave supporter and a prominent Remain supporter. As it happens, it will be Alistair Campbell next week. So if you voted for Brexit and you live in Clacton-on-Sea or around that area, we'd love to hear from you. Come and be a part of our audience. The address to follow is here. OK. I heard what you said with your pink hair, so let's come to this next question, which is from Sarah Walker.
Hi. Is there anything that the government could or should do to help those coming to the end of their fixed-rate mortgage deals and facing huge payment increases?
Is there anything the government should or could do to help those coming to the end of their fixed-rate mortgage deals and facing huge payment increases? David B., let's kick off with you.
Well, the first thing they could do is to stop encouraging the Bank of England to take sole responsibility for inflation and thereby put up interest rates still further. The average mortgage for those who, and it'll be 2.5 million people, families over the next 18 months, the average rate now is 5.9%.
It was, of course, Labour that gave the Bank of England that independence.
Oh, it was indeed. It was indeed, but we never believed that the sole golf club in dealing with the economy and with inflation was the Bank of England putting interest rates up. In fact, we had the lowest interest rates in our history until about 6 years ago. And, of course, we couldn't stay at those historic low interest rates. It was impossible to do so. But I just want to put it to you that we've got ourselves in almost like an algorithm. So we claim in order to be able to pull down inflation, we put interest rates up to slow the economy, and we get to a point where it's agreed that if we carry on like this, we'll be in recession. And when we're in recession, people have lost their jobs, they're unable to spend, and because they've shaken out the labour market, people will be paid less, then inflation comes down. That's the theory, at least from about half the economists, because the other half don't agree.
But so what do you think should happen?
Well, I think, firstly, the Bank of England are going to put interest rates up next week. They should make it absolutely clear that this is the last increase for at least 6 months. They should stop being pushed by the market. So the minute you put interest rates up, that's pocketed, it's taken into account, and then they say, what about the next time you meet? Aren't you going to put it up again? We're on a terrible algorithmic, almost a helter-skelter here, where every time they do something, it actually has the perverse outcome. Interest rates don't affect food prices. They don't affect energy prices. They don't account for the fact that the US are down to 4% inflation, France 6%, and Germany 6.3%. They're all way below us. And if the government wanted to, they could mobilise the Competition and Markets Authority. It has been done slightly on fuel prices. They're due to report in July, where, frankly, people were ripped off. I sincerely believe that there was profiteering in that area, and they could take joint action with the CMA, with the Markets Authority, with the Bank of England, and pull together a package of measures that would stop us on this cycle. That's the only way you're going to stop people being absolutely crucified by further interest rates.
OK. TC, it does feel strangely informal calling you TC, but anyway, that's what you've agreed. There was talk of the government agreeing a voluntary price cap with supermarkets, food retailers. That was only last week, I think. Is that still going ahead?
There was a discussion about that, but the original question was, if I may, just about the Bank of England and interest rates.
I only mentioned it because David Blunkett was talking about measures.
But let me come back to cost of living in a minute, because Lord Blunkett actually made the point that there is a direct link between inflation and between interest rates, and interest rates are the tool which the Bank of England used to control or to control inflation. But we are determined to bring inflation down. By bringing inflation down, interest rates can fall as well, and that's why it's so important.
And do you think the Bank of England is right to take the measures that it is?
Well, the Bank of England are targeting inflation, and as David Blunkett has just said, that is how it's done. But we can take out certain pressures on inflation. So, for example, we respect greatly the work of the public sector, doctors, nurses, and so on. But agreeing to pay rises of 35 or even 50% would create further inflation. Borrowing excess money will create further inflation. The IMF have said that Labour's plan to borrow £28 billion a year will have an impact on inflation and on interest rates. So there isn't an easy answer to it, but what we do have to do is to continue with the policies at the moment, which are working, which have brought inflation down from over 10% to 8.7% now, and it's going in the right direction.
Much more slowly than the government had anticipated.
Yes, but we're doing it. It is going in the right direction. And what the IMF has also said is that, and they said this themselves, not us, if Labour go ahead with this plan to borrow £28 billion a year, then it's going to make inflation and mortgage interest rates worse. And if people care about the cost of living, they should be looking at things like ULEZ. I mean, here in Wales, the Welsh Labour government, the Welsh Labour government are trying to do what London are doing and bringing in all sorts of charges. They're trying to ban meal deals. They're making it more expensive in so many ways for people to live.
Well, let me ask you...
We need a cost of living package that is going to...
Given that we're in the depot of a food retailer, the government's suggestion, I think it was only last week, that a voluntary price cap would be introduced among supermarkets and food retailers. Is that still going ahead?
I know that the DEFRA minister has had conversations about that, but she's talked about a voluntary price cap.
Because it's being briefed today that it isn't going to go ahead now. It lasted a week.
If it happened, it would be a voluntary one, wouldn't it? I mean, it's not going to be a magic bullet to bring down the cost of living. But
this is the Secretary of State, by the way, who suggested we should eat turnips, isn't it?
Well, David, with all due respect, we've got a Welsh Labour government that's trying to ban meal deals in Wales, so that's not doing much for the cost of living either, and to bring in road user charges.
The UK government were going to do the deals, and then they cancelled it.
Yes, and Welsh Labour should do the same thing now. And they should also rule out bringing in road user charges as well.
All right. So let's go back to the lady in pink hair, because this is the subject you want to talk about. Let's hear what you've got to say.
Price caps are a very bad thing. We've seen what happened with the oil and the energy companies with price caps. What it did was make energy more expensive. We lost a whole load of smaller companies who were competitive and were competing with each other to lower our prices so that we would go to them. And because of the energy cap, they all went out of business. Energy caps are a bad idea. Well, caps are a bad idea because it loses the market. They're not competitive. They don't try and get our custom. And it means that they just earn more money.
All right, the woman here in the front.
Hi. We're talking about the interest rates on mortgages, but what you're forgetting is food inflation's gone up to 19.1%. Wage increases are averaging at 7.4%. The Governor of the Bank of England, as you keep stating, came on and scaremongered the other day, stating that it's gone up to 7.4%. We estimated it's going to be at 3%. We're going to have interest rate increases for the next 2 years. He's now estimated it's going to be at 8%. I took on a big mortgage last year because I've got a disabled partner and I'm disabled myself. And I have a business as well. And I might have to look at releasing staff because I can't afford these interest rates with food, with energy, with everything. And the government are doing nothing.
What would you like the government to do?
What would that? I'd like them to put caps on, but what I'd also like them to do is...
Caps on what? On interest rates?
But also work with people like Iceland and the ones like that to work on initiatives rather than look and say, well, we've got this. Look at South Africa. They've got an energy issue where they have to turn electricity off. Well, you need to start investing in places and make Britain great again, rather than looking abroad for solutions. Invest in the skills of the UK and invest in the people of the UK and start building here rather than looking for solutions elsewhere.
David Linden.
I think the first thing to acknowledge in Sarah's question is that for quite a lot of people now in these islands, home ownership is a pipe dream. It's something that's incredibly out of reach for them, particularly for a lot of younger people. And yes, there are things that I think the government could be doing to support people. We've been speaking an awful lot about, for example, price caps. Look at France, for example, where they've got blocks on certain items of food. We're in a ridiculous situation where people are going to supermarkets and butter is price tagged. Baby formula is behind the counter. Now, that was not what we were promised during the Brexit campaign. We were promised that food would be cheaper. But as we have this conversation about mortgage rates, and I myself come off of a fixed rate in October, and I can only tell you how painful it's been when that's gone up. But let's not forget what happened in the autumn. The UK government crashed the economy. We are paying a premium on our mortgages because of the economic experiment of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. And so I think it's for that reason that it's incumbent upon the UK government to come forward and offer support and clean up the mess that they've made.
OK. Man in the black T-shirt. Yeah.
Well, the simple fact of the matter is that people who are mostly affected by this, there's punitive measures like green deals and things that are causing people that maybe can only afford a 13-year-old car to have to pay to enter cities or leave the place where they live. It costs them more to go to work. And these are the people that are fighting for pay rises. These are also the people in the next 2 to 3 years who are potentially going to become homeless because they can't afford a £300–400 rise on their already expensive mortgage that they already can't afford, which is getting even closer now because that £60 a month has just gone away that they were getting towards their energy bills. When's it going to give? Because the simple fact of the matter is there's support at the bottom, there's comfort at the top, and the people in the middle get nothing.
And the woman just a bit further forward in the pink, colourful pink top. Yes, you.
Yeah, I mean, I had a mortgage in the late 80s and 90s, and I was there when it was 16%, so I know the pain everybody's feeling. And I always said to myself I was going to spend my life getting all my bills paid down so I could get a life of comfort and retire and not have to worry about things. So fortunately I have paid my mortgage down and I'm not in that situation, but I feel for people because what I'm seeing, the anger and the frustration that I feel tonight is, you know, we've opened the show talking about Boris. Boris is sucking the life out of things. It's given the Conservative Party a constant sort of look at this over here while we're all dying over here from starvation, not being able to actually feed ourselves, not being able to put our heating on over the winter. We're in summer, so the temperature's gone off that now. People have used their savings. Some of us didn't get any help in COVID lockdown. We were, 3 million people self-employed didn't get any help. Their savings have already gone. They've spent it all on heating. They've spent it all on extra food. Now you're hitting them with mortgages. What's going to give before you have thousands and thousands and thousands of people losing their homes? You're making people 55-year-olds wanting to go back to work like me. There's no incentive for me to go back to work. My pension is paid. I can't put any more into it. You want to tax me and use my national insurance to pay for what? There's no incentive for me to go back to work other than the fact you need us to go back to work because you need to keep paying everybody else because you've just absolutely screwed up the economy. There's going to be so many people out of work, no food, no heating on this winter, and they're about to lose their homes, and you're sat there making excuses and blaming everybody else like you normally do.
I'll come back to you. I'll get round the rest of the panel. Charlotte.
I think it's sort of fascinating listening to you because when we had the first question, I thought, yes, we should do something about mortgages, and then every person who's spoken since has talked about something else, and then I thought, yes, we should do something about food, and then I thought, yes, we should do something about renting, and yes, we should do something. And obviously we can't do everything, right? There is a limited amount of money in the state. So I think the conclusion I've sort of come from listening to everyone is that probably if I was in charge, which thank heavens I am not, this is their problem, I think I'd probably be looking at the safety net, to be honest, right at the bottom, universal credits, something like that. That's probably what lever I'd pull. And I do appreciate what you said about nothing for people in the middle, but so many things are wrong at the moment. My instinct is we're basically, I'm hoping for the government to try and do the bare minimum.
Guto.
I think we need a lot more honesty in public life. I find this... No, I really do.
I love it. I just love it. That's great.
Grown-up honesty, not about Partygate.
Guto, why do you think people are laughing at that? Just in your own...
I know, but let's not go back to Boris, because that's what we're trying to say. Last year, when the obsession was with Partygate, he was trying to work out not only how to help people with their bills last year, £37 billion package, that's a lot of money last summer to cushion the pain, but he was thinking, how do we avoid being in the same situation at the end of the decade with another cost of living crisis? And that is looking beyond tomorrow, beyond next week, beyond the next election to, we need more nuclear power stations, we need more offshore wind. We need to take the decisions now that make those things happen so that we're not at the end of the decade like a madman reliving a problem that we've had now. And so the only way we can really address this is to grow the economy and to take the burdens off those people who are growing the economy. And one key fact that nobody mentions, nobody's going to stick up for that wild sort of 4 weeks when, there were two people in charge of the economy.
Well,
that
you
did a lot
might,
of damage.
because obviously you supported this trust.
But we've
got someone on the panel who supported this trust,
you keep saying you're going to come to me. I'm looking forward to it.
But a really serious one. When I say, let's be honest about it, the government spent £400 billion paying people to stay at home, being economically inactive during the lockdown. They did it for noble reasons, to save lives, to stop people dying. But we can't pretend that £400 billion is not an awful lot of money that now means there isn't money to do all the other noble things that should be done.
How much of that money was wasted?
So if we can be honest about that, not just about whether somebody said this, but
how much of that money was wasted on dodgy PPE contracts for Matt Hancock's friends that had to be burned because it wasn't used?
There's £400 billion. Most of it went to people who had to close their business, who had to stop going to work, who had to shut down their restaurant. And the reasons for that were noble at the time. But let's be honest, if you really want honesty in public life, let's be honest that money doesn't grow on trees, and £400 billion was a lot of money, and that's why we're in trouble now, not because even Liz Truss couldn't lose us £400 billion.
OK. Your chance.
OK. We put together, on top of that £400 billion, there was £94 billion that was put together for cost of living support, and that helped to pay for half of people's fuel bills over the winter. So we're really aware of the points that you raised. But the lady there talked about investment in the United Kingdom. I agree with you. We were able to raise that money through taxing oil and gas companies in the UK at 75%. And I hope that the SNP and Lord Blunkett are going to tell us why they want to shut those industries down, why they want to stop any more oil and gas being pulled out of the North Sea, which is going to destroy 200,000 British jobs and force us to spend even more money bringing in oil and gas from abroad whilst throwing people out of work. What is that going to do?
And what about the woman there who said you're sitting here just making excuses? You said, no, I'm not. So perhaps
I'm not making an excuse because of what that lady said and what you said, madam. You're absolutely right. There is a real problem with cost of living at the moment. We're not hiding from it at all. I totally recognise it. But Guto had a point. When we spend £400 billion in the way that we did, we know from what happened a year ago that if you borrow money, then there is an impact. There's an impact eventually on inflation and mortgage interest rates. If you tax people more in order to give money back to other people, that has an impact on some people's living standards. So there are no easy answers. We cannot magic the money out from nowhere, and we're doing the very best that we can. And that's why I'm very proud that the government made it a priority to make sure that pensions and benefits and that the minimum wage all went up in line with inflation, and that there were additional payments to the most needy, £900 to the households on benefits, £300 for pensions, £150 for those on disability. Has it reached everyone? No, it hasn't. But we're doing absolutely our very best because we recognise the problems which you've raised.
Yes, what about the middle group?
Well, the gentleman made the point about you, Les, but I've already made that point, so I completely agree with you. It's absolutely ridiculous that we've got a Labour council in London, a Labour government in Wales that want to bring in extra charges on people just for driving to work, people who can't afford the top-of-the-range electric cars, and I totally condemn that and wouldn't want to see that happen in Wales.
There's quite a few hands. I'm going to spend a little bit longer on this before I move on to another question. The man there in the black T-shirt.
The lady mentioned about universal credit. You can't trust universal credit or PIP. My brother is severely disabled. He actually needs PIP, and they've turned around.
Just for those who don't know what PIP is.
Personal independence.
Yes.
So my brother is really disabled. He can't go back to work. My mum's now got to go to court, who I'm with today. She's got to go to court with my brother to get his PIP back. So you can't trust it.
OK. And the man over there in the blue shirt.
It's a known fact that in the UK we've got some of the worst insulated properties in Europe. We're wasting lots of energy, and we're having to help people out because they can't afford to pay their energy bills. I think we should be doing much more to insulate properties. I mean, the more we do that, the more we're going to save, the less power we're going to have to generate. Yeah. And be more self-sufficient. But I think it's a no-brainer. Yeah. It's a no-brainer to start. Okay.
The man in the white T-shirt there. No, further back. Yes, if you keep your hand up, we can find you. There you go.
TC just said Rishi Sunak is reduced the numbers of boats. He's a complete liar, and I tell you that now because he put a tweet up the other day saying that it's reduced the numbers of boats. Last weekend was the biggest rise of the small boats coming across. And my next question is, how much are the Conservative government wasting to transition the ex-MOD camps to migration centres? Of taxpayers' money, what you're going to be wasting? Well, when you could use that as part of helping cost of living.
I mean, there's two issues there. First of all, the numbers overall have been going down this year, and there have been thousands of people stopped from coming over from France. I agree with you. You're right to hold us to account on this, because it is very important we tackle it. Secondly, we were spending millions of pounds every day on housing people who come here illegally in hotels. That is unacceptable, and it's much better that people are housed in more basic accommodation, because we have to take away the incentive that makes people want to come here in the first place. And again, we're sitting here in Wales. We have a Welsh Labour government that is now paying a £20,000 salary, a universal basic income, to underage asylum seekers in certain local authority areas, which they see as a pilot, which they want to extend, and which is going to be a magnet which will encourage even more people to risk their lives and come into this country illegally. I'm perfectly supportive of safe and legal migration to people who come over to this country legally, but what I would not do is to encourage people to come over here by small boats, because it will end in tragedy and it ends in people being exploited, and it's also unfair on the people who live in this country.
OK. I'll take another, if you don't mind, I'm just going to take another question from Catherine Parnell. Catherine Parnell, where are you? Oh, great. Let's hear from you.
Are Victorian abortion laws still appropriate in 2023?
Right, so Catherine, you're raising this because I'm sure most, if not all of you, are aware that a mother of 3 has been jailed for 28 months for inducing an abortion after the legal limit being 24 weeks, and she was considerably further on than that, and she is now going to serve time in custody. Charlotte?
Yeah, I saw obviously the same news story that you saw, and I really didn't like it. I think obviously what we saw there was someone who broke the rules, someone who did have an extremely late-term abortion, probably, to be honest, quite a traumatic medical event given what happened there for this woman herself. It's not like she's going to be coming back and repeat offending every year. That is not something that people are doing repeatedly for fun, let's be honest. And the fact that she has ended up in prison for this, whether or not you think she did the right or wrong thing, I think helps absolutely no one. It doesn't help her. It certainly doesn't help her 3 children who have lost their mum for a few years. I don't feel happier or safer for it. I don't think any woman in the country feels happier or safer for it. And I don't think it protects children in any way, shape or form. I wouldn't say...
So do you think there should have been any sanction?
I think she did break the law as it exists, but a custodial sentence, sending someone to jail for that, for me, just seems to benefit absolutely no one. It also doesn't feel particularly like justice for me. What I will say, and I always worry when we talk about abortion, is I think we often, as a country, act like we're little America, and we sort of import America's fights. And obviously America have a much bigger fight on their hands when it comes to abortion rights than we do. And I sometimes worry that by importing that fight a bit, we almost open it up as more of a discussion than it has to be. This is a settled debate in this country. People, if you poll them, believe in the right to abortion. And sometimes I worry that by sort of hyping it up into an Americanized style, we almost open it up and say, go on, let's talk about it. Let's talk about whether abortion is okay or not, when we all know it is okay.
Well, the question, I think, why the reason you asked the question is because the woman has gone to prison.
She has, but under, you know, we all have this settled agreement that the laws as they exist broadly work. The custodial sentence, I don't think, is necessarily part of that.
David Linden, do you think that I mean, it's a law from, what, 1861, offences against the person. Now, do you think we should be scrapping that?
Look, I understand that for a lot of people this is a really sensitive topic, but I cannot get away from the fact that a mother who has 3 children has been put in prison as a result of this, and I think we should be mindful of the fact that this was probably a very difficult thing for everybody involved. But the idea that we would use prison, which I think most of us would accept, is to rehabilitate people and also to make sure that the rest of society is safe. The idea that we would use prison to put that woman in there, deprive her of her time with her 3 children, I just think is a tremendous waste of the judicial system that's already under a huge amount of pressure. And my thoughts are very much for those 3 children who have lost their mum.
So do you think it should be decriminalised? In Northern Ireland, it's a different system, and in Northern Ireland, the woman would not be penalised. It would be the medical professional who had administered the substance or the retailer.
I mean, the fact that this legislation dates back to 1860, I think, tells you yourself that this is something that has to be reviewed. It's got to be reviewed by senior ministers, because we cannot have a situation where a woman goes to prison for several years and leaves behind her 3 children as a result of legislation that is 200-300 years old.
Woman with the blonde hair, and I think you've got your glasses in your hair, yes.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you, and I'm quite pleased that you brought up the American issue as well, because I think this sets a really dangerous precedent in light of what is going on in America with their really strict abortion restrictions. And as the medical community wrote to the judge on this trial, they advised against a custodial sentence because it will dissuade people from accessing this very vital healthcare. And regardless of what you think about term limits on abortions, I completely agree there is no benefit to anyone for this lady going to a custodial sentence. It's certainly not a benefit to her existing children. And yeah, I just think as a woman, it's a very scary time.
Okay, woman at the back in the glasses.
Hi, I think it's ridiculous that this lady's received such a long sentence when paedophiles receive much less.
Right, OK. TC.
Well, I don't disagree with much of that. I don't feel happier or safer by the fact this woman's gone to prison. Although, interestingly, we are all now, discussing a quasi-legal decision, and by doing that, we're not in any way, I don't think, threatening the courts or the law or anything. But it is slightly contradictory to what we were doing 20 minutes ago, when we were told that under no circumstances should anyone be querying the committee. But let's leave that to one side.
Well, you said that you were not querying the committee.
I'm not. But lots of other people were bringing that up. So I respect due process. So we have to respect what the judge has done. I don't feel happier.
Do you think the law should be changed?
I would look at it. I mean, personally, I voted for buffer zones outside abortion clinics because I don't think it's right that women who are exercising their legal right to abortion should be, frankly, intimidated by people who may say that they are peacefully protesting, but they're not. What they're doing is, in my view, intimidation of very vulnerable people. And I think that all of the women who are involved...
You did also vote.
I actually think that 24 weeks is too high, so I'm probably not making friends with anyone. I think it's actually not that contradictory to think that any woman who finds themselves in that situation is a victim and should not be stigmatised, but to be able to raise concerns about the 24-week limit. And I hope
what do you think it should be?
I tell you what, I think we should have a proper discussion with medical professionals, not people outside abortion clinics leading it. I also agree with that. The point the lady made, and yourself, David, and I think Charlotte, that we do not want to turn this into a sort of US-style debate where you're either on one side of the argument or on another side. There should be a reasonable, pragmatic way of dealing with this in a grown-up fashion, and the women who find themselves in that situation deserve this subject to be debated in a reasonable way. So that's my view on it.
Just out of interest, if you think 24-week limit is too high...
I'm not going to get drawn on this.
No, but you must have a view on what you think it should be if you think 24 weeks is too high.
I would listen with an open mind, but I think I've shown my open-mindedness by being quite happy to vote with Labour MPs for buffer zones outside abortion clinics, because I don't think any woman who exercises their legal right to abortion should be intimidated in any way.
Let's just... The man here in the middle, in the white shirt. Hang on, just start again, we couldn't hear you.
Is not anyone going to speak up for the unborn child, though, if it was near 8 months, when perfectly healthy babies can be born at 6 and 7 months and 8 months? Not one person has spoke up for the child.
Well, you are now, and do you think it's right that she should go to prison as a result?
If there's a week's limit, there is a week's limit. That's the law. What about the child? Perfectly healthy children are born at 7 months and 8 months.
I think the law was clearly broken. There's no doubt about that.
It is murder. It is death, and that's the law. If that's the law, that's the law.
Look, maturing white men are not always the best people to make judgments on this.
We guys have David on this panel,
But given that
Hang on, he just wants to come back in.
No, I'm just going to say...
I take issue with the comment. I take issue with the comment. What does my colour got to do with the debate?
I was talking about myself.
That is disgusting comment.
I was talking about myself. I'm the maturing white male, and I'm very diffident. I took part in the embryology bill debate 30 years ago. It was difficult then, and it's really difficult now. And the thing I fully agree with is that we mustn't Americanise this really sensitive debate. It isn't for or against, it's getting it right. We've got three conjunctions here of the termination pill, the 10-week pill, which was allowed to be prescribed without consultation, without face-to-face consultation during COVID, and has now been codified, so that's available. We've got the 1861 Act, the overriding of the situation in Northern Ireland back in 2019 because of the failure of the Northern Ireland devolution to be able to deal with the issue and the anomalies. We've got to actually try and sort all those things out without falling into the trap of saying that termination of the level that you've just spoken about, 8 months on, is acceptable, because it is not. It can only be acceptable if it saves the life of the mother. And what came out of it for me was the lack of support, the fear, the worry of that woman. And we had an interchange in the Lords this morning. We do try and do some good, when it was very clear that it will go to appeal, that there's something called the royal prerogative, that it is possible that this will be overturned, and a community sentence would have been, and will, in my view, be most appropriate. But let's not get it mixed up with the right to choose is inalienable. I accept it, that the woman's right to choose, but not to choose to have an abortion at 32 weeks. It is just not acceptable.
OK, let's look at the woman here.
My son was born at 30 weeks. That child is certainly a viable child. And like that gentleman, I do want to speak up for that child. I am pro-abortion. I was horrified by the story, and I think that the law is the law. And without the ability to judge her myself, I think that what happened was possibly premeditated, and that maybe the law didn't go quite far enough. But I agree that abortion should be a choice that is available to women.
And just so I could, do you think it's right that she has gone to prison?
Yes.
OK. Guto.
I'm the father of twins who were born at 36 weeks, so a little bit later. So, but I feel desperately, desperately sorry for a woman who finds herself in that predicament, that she is 32 weeks pregnant, and the system has allowed her to get to that point without helping her. So for me, she's not there to be punished, because she is as much of a victim of a system that did not help her early in the process. A mother of 3, now deprived of access to their children, I mean, it's beyond parody, but also she would have not wanted to do that herself. That would have been the last thing she wanted to do, was to abort a child at 32 weeks. So if she ended up doing that, it was because the system did not allow her to do it earlier on. And some of this may be down to the unique, messed up situation of COVID. No. But going forwards, what I would sort of focus on... How do you think
the system stopped her?
When people couldn't see their GP and couldn't see...
No, but she became pregnant, did she not, in September 2019? Is that not correct?
The exact details are quite... It was December that she found out.
So I don't know the exact details, but the answer to this is to make sure that a woman's right to choose is one that is exercised with the full support of the state at a practical time, at the earliest opportunity, so that nobody, including this woman for whom I have great sympathy, does not end up with a trauma for her and the breaking of the law and a signal to society that 32 weeks is OK. It's not.
OK. Look, it's a very sensitive topic, and people have different views, and I appreciate you all putting your hands up and talking about that, and we will listen respectfully, and I think that's exactly what should happen.
And could I just make one thing very clear? Yeah, it's a very small point, but for the audience who don't know me, I wasn't making a point earlier about the man's colour. How could I? I can't see you.
Yeah. OK. That is it for this week. Remember, we're available as a podcast on BBC Sounds. Next week, we will be in Clacton-on-Sea. That should be a pretty interesting programme. Make sure you tune in or apply to be in the audience from Question Time here in Deeside. Until next week, bye-bye.